G'day, Ruddle Maniacs. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Hope your Monday is going well so far. We're back with another interview. By the time this one airs, I think I'll be into my first week of fun employment. So I'm hoping that currently, present time Taylor right now is resting up. I hope he's looking after his hands. I hope he's keeps writing. And I just in general hope that he's not sitting there stressed out and in horror thinking that he's made a terrible mistake. I'm sure it'll be fine. I've been thinking about this decision for a long time. It was not one that I made lightly. So I hope you're having a wonderful week. I hope Taylor is having a restful Monday morning, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Dan Bain. So Dan Bain is a Christchurch-based performer, much like myself. He is a writer, a director, a performer, and a maker of fun things based in New Zealand, according to his Linktree bio. I've known Dan for a little while now. He's always been very kind to me. I think we are pretty good buddies. As I mentioned in the interview, we are both very similar in the fact that we are self-admitted control freaks and we are kind of one-man bands, and that we handle a lot of different areas of production in our respective areas. Dan is a designer much like myself. He has his own unique style, and he leans more into the photographic element, where I think mine is more like the whatever the opposite of photographic is. I don't want to say illustrative because I'm not an illustrator, but it's not as photographic as Dan's. In the first interview, which you're about to hear shortly, we talk about the album Hail to the Thief by Radiohead, which I admittedly didn't know a lot about Radiohead. I was familiar with them and I knew of them, but I didn't really know anything specific about the band. So I do apologize if some of my questions are a little bit stupid, or I'm just not asking good leading questions, because I just don't know enough about the band. I did some research, I listened to the album the morning of, but I just don't think you can compare that with someone who's been a fan of them for a long time asking the right questions. But I think it was an interesting conversation all the same. I really enjoyed talking to Dan about the way that Radiohead combine physical art in the real world with music. I didn't really know that about them when we started this interview, so that was a really interesting thing for me to learn. Anyway, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Hope you enjoy the interview. As you see at the end of this interview, we talk about coming back next week for part 2, where we delve into Dan's current main project, which is the Perfect Storm improv show at Little Andromeda. So with that, let's crack into the interview with Dan Bain. Hello, Ruddle Maniacs. Welcome to Ruddle Me This. My name is Taylor Ruddle, and I have a good friend of mine as a guest today. This is Dan Bain. Hi, Dan. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Taylor.
How are you doing? You having a good day?
Yeah, it's been pretty good so far. I've just set up. Dinner is kind of just waiting for the oven to be turned on, which feels like a great kind of position to be in. Everything's done. It just needs to, and then away it'll go. So.
The final big red button to push. So that's fantastic.
Exactly.
So I spent most of the morning listening to the album that you've selected for your. I guess it's a poster, but it's also the album cover. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's the kind of the key album art that also got used as a bunch of promo material and that sort of thing.
Yes. So for the listeners out there, the album we're looking at in this episode is Hail to the Thief by Radiohead, which was from 2003, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'll just read. I've got a little bit of the blurb from Wikipedia here, so I'll read that off to anybody unfamiliar with Radiohead. So Hail to the Thief is the 6th studio album by the English rock band Radiohead. It was released on the 9th of June 2003 through Parlophone internationally, and a day later through Capitol Records in the United States. It was the last album released under Radiohead's record contract with EMI, the parent company of Parlophone and Capitol. And I've got another spiel here, but it's just about the technical details of the album, which maybe we can get into later. So, for the audio-only listeners, we'll just give a quick... Would you like to describe what exactly the album cover looks like to the listeners, Dan?
Yeah, so the album cover is, first of all, it's a painting and it's quite a simplistic painting of. It's a really simplified and stylized down map of Hollywood, and it's kind of been broken up into city blocks or neighborhoods, and each of the neighborhoods has a slogan, I guess, painted across it, kind of handwritten, saying things that were sourced from street signs. So just things that it just says things like TV, oil, pool, teens, sunset, hamburger, just things like that. That all of which were sourced, and the color is very much kind of primitive, kind of a primitivism take on roadside signage. So it's all block capitals, and it's all really kind of primary colors. It's got a real kind of Americana kind of vibe to it. But
I was going to chime in and say that it feels like a very modern sort of Americana, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also it kind of has the effect of having all those words kind of jammed together, though, does kind of create this really kind of an uneasy sense, I guess, is how I would describe it. With them kind of out of the context of actually advertising a business and just having that kind of, I don't know, the piling on of these rampant signalers of capitalism.
It feels a little bit almost pre-apocalyptic to me, like if you were to be walking down a totally empty Hollywood, you would just kind of see these bits and pieces, and there's something very like consume about it to me. And because the band actually recorded this album in Hollywood, have I got that correct? So I imagine going from England to there, it was probably a bit of culture shock seeing all of the neon signs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, Los Angeles itself is such a. I mean, it's not even quite America, you know.
That's right. It's its own
a thing unto itself.
Yes. I've heard this thing about Amsterdam. Apparently, if you go to Amsterdam, you haven't really been to Holland. I imagine the same as with LA.
Yeah.
And so what in particular makes this album, I guess the question actually is more like, is it specifically this artwork that is meaningful to you, or is it the album in its entirety?
I think it's a combination of the two. This, for me, I picked this because it was a really distinct art project that kind of went along with the album. So obviously this is the Hollywood map, but there's a whole lot of other city maps done in the same style.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there's a Baghdad, and there's a bunch of other artwork that kind of went along with it, and so they're all done by Stanley Donwood, who is kind of the artist / graphic designer that's done most of the Radiohead liner notes since OK Computer.
Yes.
But also with this other entity called Dr. Chock, which is Tom York from Radiohead. That's his kind of fine art
Gotcha.
nom de plume.
I was noticing that looking back, because I did read the thing about it being the same artist that they collaborate with for each album. And there's quite a range of styles. Like their first one, OK Computer, almost looks like it could be a 3D generated artwork. And then all sorts of almost like that pulpy magazine cutout, photocopied a bunch of times, thing that even some punk bands do on some of the albums, and down to actually using I assume oil paints or maybe acrylic paints for this one. So there's quite a range there. I was going to say as well, the other maps that you mentioned before, were they specifically ties into this album, or were they an already existing piece of artwork that they kind of...
They were all done during kind of along with the making of this kind of album.
Gotcha.
So there definitely were these kind of parallel projects that kind of went on with like, we're recording this music and we're also making this kind of art, and they're exploring the same themes through different mediums.
That's great. I really like that.
And one of the things that I do really enjoy about this piece and the kind of progression of it is that it kind of it works a really kind of indistinct line between as you mentioned, kind of fine art and zine kind of scribbles. And it's certainly a big influence kind of for me on I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point, but my the Perfect Storm Instagram, which is all a huge amount of it is really kind of primitive but hopefully evocative hand drawings that are quite have a kind of scribble.
Yes, I see that now that you mention it.
Ready-made kind of aesthetic. Yeah,
that was one thing that I noticed, because I obviously went through some of. I was listening to. I'm familiar with Radiohead, but not to the extent where I could really name many of their songs or anything. But I was familiar with that little logo, the bear, I think, with the sharp teeth.
Yes.
And as I was looking through, I thought, this is Dan, or like something about it just feels like the kind of design work that you do in all the projects. And so I could definitely see it made sense as to that you were a fan of this band.
That, and the other one is the one that really they did a lot of is along with the Sharp-Toothed Bears is another one called the Crying Minotaur.
Oh, okay.
Which is, again, it's kind of a very same aesthetic, really scribbled kind of picture, but of a minotaur that's always crying.
That's so
like
cool.
Big kind of anime tears, kind of wah.
Yes, I'm looking at it just now. That's really cool. I like that. And that's a Radiohead album cover, or is it just an image that they've used?
That one is that one really got used a lot in the Amnesiac
gotcha
album work.
I really like that. That's great. I do enjoy that kind of Sharpie pen drawing into some nice toothy paper that so the ink bleeds a little bit, and then you put a live trace over that in InDesign, and you get quite a nice look. And the sort of to quote Marco Pierre White, the chef, there is through imperfection you find perfection, and that's what I quite like about that look. And I think a lot of that, I remember reading something about this album about they put it together in about 2 weeks. Radiohead tried to work quickly and spontaneously, avoiding procrastination and over-analysis. The guitarist Johnny Greenwood said, "We didn't really have time to be stressed about what we did. We got to the end of the second week before we even heard what we did on the first 2 days." Which is a good lesson that people can take about not getting too bogged down and trying to make your artwork perfect before releasing it. Is that something that you find yourself struggling with, or have you been pretty good about just being able to continuously output things without worrying too much about the quality?
I try not to. I mean, it's such a line to walk, right?
Yes.
You don't want to get caught up in perfectionism, but you also don't want to just be putting out kind of substandard stuff that isn't.
That's right. You do need to have a sort of a minimum bar of quality before you release things. Yeah.
And so, but it really resonates with me when you mentioned that quote about through imperfection finding perfection, because I think certainly for the work that I do for advertising and kind of promoting Perfect, that theme not only is kind of fairly easy to kind of generate, I can do it pretty quickly, but it's the reason I kind of gravitated towards it is that it thematically aligns with the show.
Yes.
The show is generated in the moment, and often if you looked at it in retrospect, you would say this is imperfect, but at the moment that it is generated, 90% of the time, it's perfect in the room. It's the right thing.
Yes.
And that's why we called it Perfect. It is like it's perfect, but it's a little bit fucked.
That's the most Kiwi description I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So we will definitely get the perfect storm to the listeners out there. Let's try and mine as much out of the Radiohead as we can. So do you remember the first time you listened to this particular album, or was there an ad campaign or anything that kind of drew you to it? Were you just a fan of Radiohead beforehand?
I was a fan of Radiohead beforehand. I'd been a fan of Radiohead since probably '98, I think. Like I think everyone, my first taste was the Creep single.
Oh yeah, of course.
Which now seems so far away from kind of what Radiohead is and does, but
yeah,
that was an entry point for sure. I was a huge fan of the Bends, which was kind of the follow-up album after their kind of initial one, and the Bends was also one of the earliest CDs that I ever owned. That and also computer actually, but definitely the Bends, and both of those I was obsessed with the physical object.
It's a nice thing to have, isn't it?
Yeah, and the multi-page kind of booklet that, and also that it had, I mean, they had lyrics in them, but sometimes the lyrics were wrong. Like sometimes they were very clear. It's like, that's not the lyrics at all. It's not that I'm, there's no room for confusion. It's not like, oh, maybe I've been hearing it wrong. That's what they actually are. Those are completely different words with a completely different sentiment. So sometimes there would be those kind of
I wonder
kind of puzzles or mysteries or misdirects within it.
Do you think,
or early drafts of songs?
Yeah,
as well.
I was going to say, do you think it was intentional? Like they had to get something to the designers to make the booklet, and they just sent what they had at the time, or do you think it was done on purpose just to be a little bit interesting and weird?
My gut feeling is that it is deliberate, because everything seems so intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's sort of a thing from a bygone age. Like I'm more into video games than music, and video games used to come with a little lore booklet, and quite often those two, I think sometimes you felt like they weren't written by the developers of the game, and they would be very vague in weird ways, or they would just be playing wrong and stuff, but there was something exciting about reading it. Like it helped build to the anticipation of playing the game, because you'd get it in the store. We had to go back into stores back in those days. And then on the drive home, you could be reading the booklet, sort of getting excited for the game. And
yeah, no, I certainly have a very similar memory of going with my friend to hire a video game from
yes, absolutely,
like PC World or something, not even a PlayStation game, like hiring a PC game.
That's right.
And being on the bus back to his house and just like going through all this shit that's in the thing, like just so much stuff, and being like,
it's very much
just getting hyped about it.
Yeah, it's very much a pre-internet kind of experience, that. And I'm going to guess that Radiohead are still releasing physical CDs. It seems like they would still have vinyls being released as well. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah. I just for Christmas I got the re-release of Kid A and Amnesiac, which is a kind of double album package thing. Yeah, and it also has an extra one of a bunch of unreleased material that was unreleased from those sessions, and but it's still not quite as even though they've got like all that space, they still, there isn't like the booklet that kind of came with it. With when they released, I think was it Amnesiac? Might have been Kid A. Maybe it was Kid A. There was a booklet in it, and then there was another hidden booklet.
That's awesome.
You know how so there's the booklet slides into the front of the CD case.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the back of the CD case.
Yeah.
That has the spindle that the CD
totally
sits on. But that's made of two pieces, and if you pried that off, there was another booklet in there, which just and again, this was, I mean, it was very nascent internet days. I didn't have the internet at that kind of point, so I discovered it myself, and it blew my mind. I was it's like I found a secret magazine.
That's great.
Hidden inside this thing, and that I'd had for ages.
What was the contents of the second booklet? Do you remember?
Yeah, so the second booklet had all this. I'm pretty sure it was the Kid A one, and the secret booklet had. Again, it was just illustration, very similar to kind of it was just illustration and, sharp-toothed bears and crying minotaurs, because it was from that period.
Gotcha.
But there were also all these lyrical fragments in it and through it, like all the artwork kind of does have, that didn't make any sense at the time, but that then were when Amnesiac, which was kind of the came out quite soon after Kid A, and was kind of a companion album to it in some ways. They were lyric fragments from Amnesiac.
So they were like a sort of teaser for the next album?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you just love to have the time to be able to work little secret doohickeys into your projects like that?
I know, amazing. I mean, that's the advantage, I think, of the collaboration with Stanley Donwood, right? Is that the band is mostly recording albums, and he comes in and is like, "What's this album about?" "Oh yeah," and then him and Tom go and have a drink, and it's like, "What are the lyrics like?" And he's like, "Oh, it's this kind of thing," and he's like, "Okay, cool," and then he can go away and do just like, great, you guys are recording music for 4 weeks, cool, I'm gonna go do weird sketches and these kind of glacial oil paintings and stuff like that.
Have you ever worked in tandem with another sort of artist like that, where you're both doing you're kind of working on the same project but you're handling different aspects of it?
Yeah, so the thing that kind of jumps the most to me, I did a collaboration with Chris Reddington, who's a fine artist, sculptor, and a set designer, and he was the set designer on my production of Titus Andronicus.
Yep. And
we spent a long time trying to work out what the set was for that, and we struck on a couple of things really early. One of them was that it was basically going to be these two structures that were made out of light boxes.
Right.
So when you stood on them, they could be lit from underneath through the box. The box they were kind of like X-ray boxes, kind of like that. So we had these two structures, one either side of the stage, and they were a little bit modular, so they could rearrange a little bit, but not a huge amount. But they would change, and we were very happy with that. But the next thing was what was the background, and we had this idea for this big, it was just going to be a big drapery, but we weren't quite sure what it was going to be. And then he kind of went away and did some of his fine art guy thinkings.
Yeah.
And then he came back with this concept, and it was a big abstract painting that was mostly red and white dots, kind of Jackson Pollocked onto it.
Right.
But when you were right back from, and you got to understand this thing's massive. It's like 10 meters by 4 meters.
Right.
This painting.
Uh-huh.
And when you went right back, there were 13 vertical, kind of delineated vertical stripes on it, or like these, or like imagine like the Roman letter I, like I, all through it, kind of ghost-like underneath the spattering and stuff. And I'm like, I'm like, this is cool. What's this? And he's like, oh, this is the 13 murders that happened during the play.
Oh, that's really thematic.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's cool. And so he would go and do this, and I actually found myself, it was hung up in the, before it got installed in the stage, it was hung up in the workshop, and occasionally if I got stuck with what I was doing with the actors on stage or whatever, I'd just go out and sit in the workshop and just look at the painting.
Oh wow, that's really cool.
And just be like, I think the answers are maybe in the painting somewhere.
Damn.
Yeah, even though it's, it's very, very abstract. It's not like they weren't literally there, but it was a really kind of, this painting is also all about the thing I'm making.
Yeah, it sort of feeds back into the production of the actual play. That's really fascinating. I was going to say as well, I think we're fairly similar in the way that we are kind of one-person production houses. We tend to do a lot of the stuff when we're producing what we produce.
Yep.
Is that the way you like to do it, or do you sometimes think to yourself, maybe it would be nice to have an artist to handle all the art and, I don't know, like a music person to handle the music, or a video person and things like that? Or do you quite enjoy the hustle of doing it all yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to have. I mean, I think I could do more stuff if I could delegate more things out. But I'm also really, I'm such a control freak.
I relate to you 100% there, friend.
Yeah, I was just so. It has to really be someone that I know kind of really gets what I'm after.
Yeah.
And also someone that I knows someone I know that can kind of work with me, because I am always going to be like, I love this bit is so great, this bit is so great, this bit here, what if it was,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever reach a critical mass where you feel like you need to look into getting other people to help, or are you feeling like you've kind of got a handle on it at the moment?
I mean, for the scale of things that I am currently doing, I don't need anyone to help me, but that is limiting. It's you can only scale so far up.
That's true.
If you're doing everything yourself. But unfortunately, scaling requires capital. Is the kind of the key thing there. So, I've got a bunch of things that are I know are kind of menial tasks that I do all the time, even though they're quote unquote creative tasks, but
I know exactly what you mean. There was a book recommended to me. I can't exactly remember who the author was, but it was a fellow comic, and the book is called Who Not How, and I basically said the same thing that you said. It was written by Dan Sullivan. Who Not How, the formula to achieve the title of bigger goals, and it comes down to that idea that as a creative, if you are succeeding, then eventually you're going to have to start valuing your time in terms of what is it worth to, like, you think of yourself as a company and you think, what is my time worth as an accountant? And for example, me as an accountant, I'm not very good at it. Like, I get it done in the end, but it's not something I would say I'm very good at. But like you say, you need capital sometimes to make this sort of thing happen.
And so that's the But yeah, like there are things like, I mean, I make a fair number of podcasts currently. The editing of them is, you know, it doesn't need to be me that does it.
Yeah.
You know, I've already made the content. I don't need to go through it and cut out the ums.
Yes.
But that's something that I still do, because they haven't got to a point where I can kind of justify tipping them over and just going, actually, it's worth me.
Yes, I know.
But that,
exactly
you know, expansionist phase of kind of anything, I think.
Well, I was going to say this as well. I feel like we've maybe had this conversation in person before, but your production company is maybe not the right word. Your Noost Octopus Theatre. Your eventual goals for that, I can see that becoming a bit like a Disney, in that it's a sort of media. I don't want to say mogul as such, but do you know the vibe that I'm talking about here, where a production house maybe is the best way to word that? Is that something you could see happening with Noost Octopus?
Yeah, it certainly is it's an umbrella company, right? I think is kind of how I see it. And it's genre and form agnostic in that it doesn't, you know, I'll produce a theatre show, but I'll produce a comedy show. I'll make a podcast. You know, I'll make my book. It published my book. You know what I mean? Like,
that's right. Yeah, I'll leave a link to that at the end with all the tags.
Cool, thank you. Yeah. So it's just at the end of the day, as the sports folk love to say, it's just it's just a name and a logo to plunk on things. But it's, you know, it was quite fun when you know, I'd go into Little Andromeda when I just started producing there, before I even worked there, and it'd be like, oh yeah, that show's got that logo on it. That show's got that like there's like 4 shows in the season that have got like just little like in the corner, and it's like, oh yeah, nice, good.
It is nice to see your own kind of
takeover begins.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, how long until they're all Noost Octopus in some way?
Yes.
Oh, I was going to follow up to that, but I've lost my train of thought there.
That's right.
No, that's all right. We'll circle back to the Radiohead a little bit. Are there any projects you've taken on or done in the past that you feel like this poster was a direct inspiration for? Like, did you take any elements of it and use them in your own way for your own work?
I think I've used this kind of idea of kind of cascading text a lot, and I think more so maybe less this one particularly I chose because it really tickles me. I really like it. But in terms of the more scribble kind of style, the more the imagery from kind of the beans especially was really definitive, I guess, for me, or kind of defining. Because I was listening to it when I was 15, 16, and the things that the things that you kind of get into there are really kind of
informative.
They're
right?
they're really imprinting on who you're going to become. And there was a bunch of little kind of scribblies in that, much like the Sharp-Toothed Bear or the Crying Minotaur, that I would just draw. I would just draw them on everything.
Yeah, there's something to be said in that, having something that even a child could reproduce.
Yeah, because they were simple, but they were cool. And was there an origin story for the Sharp-Toothed Bear? Because that's the only thing I sort of had in my head as synonymous with Radiohead, but I really don't know anything else about the symbol. Yeah, I think it might have been initially designed as a polar bear, and there's some sort of, I think there's some sort of climate change messaging around it.
That would make sense, because I was reading about the production of this album, and it was fairly political, even though they seem to sort of or they seem to deny it a little bit in what I've read about it. But a guy I work with, well, actually, I don't know if I told you this. Have I told you I'm finishing up at work on 4th of May this year?
No, but either congratulations or commiserations, whatever is the correct way to respond to that.
I found that answer depends on the age of the person I tell it to. People my generation and younger usually cheer and give me a sort of go-off queen kind of response. But a lot of people older than us and sort of my parents' age tend to just ask, well, what are you going to do instead? Yes. And so I believe by the time this podcast drops, it'll be my first week of what I'm calling fun employment.
Yes.
So I had a reason that I brought that up. The Radiohead logo. What were we just talking about before that? The reason. Yes.
The politicization of it.
Yes. So a fellow that I worked with at this point, he was telling me that sort of early 2000s Bush presidency, war on terror kind of era, even though it was terrible for the States, it was amazing for punk rock. And I was just thinking back about how we also got that Green Day American Idiot album. I believe that was an anti-Bush thing. And then even the name from this album, I think, was an anti-Bush sentiment that they sort of appropriated. You presumably would have been more cognizant than I was during this time. Like, I was probably 8 years old, something like that, when this album came out. Do you remember much about being alive during that time?
The Bush era? Yeah, a little bit. I remember I was in America on the first anniversary of 9/11.
Oh wow!
In New York City.
Yep.
That was very busy.
I can imagine it was a somber week.
Yeah, and I went to Ground Zero when it was still a kind of a hole in the ground, and appalling actually, because it actually was just hurricane fencing with people selling American flags.
Oh, jeez.
It was really, I found it really tawdry.
Yeah, no kidding.
Kind of unpleasant. But yeah, no, I certainly remember that era, and I remember when they the invasion of Iraq happened. I
was just talking about that this morning. I thought that does seem odd to call that a war, because it seemed more like an occupation than anything else, based on what little I've seen about it and stuff.
Yeah. So, and I certainly remember at the time being very. I think it was a real turning point for me of realizing that, and kind of going to America for the first time in the Bush presidency, of kind of realizing that America is the world's biggest propaganda machine. The kind of the land of the free, the home of the brave, where the streets are paved with gold, and the freest country in the world, and everyone wants to live here, is not really is smoke and mirrors.
Sure,
Like, bits of America are blooming great. What an incredible place. Absolutely incredible. But huge chunks of it are just awful. Just so unpleasant.
Did you spend quite a bit of time over there?
I spent 3 months there touring around, kind of from all down the kind of east of the country, so from kind of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, all that kind of thing. But also I went all the way down to Alabama. I spent time in Birmingham down there.
When you're saying New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, I imagine American listeners will be going, well, no wonder you don't think the country's that amazing.
Yeah. And later on, I was not on that particular trip, but I also spent a bit of time in LA and San Diego, which is very, very different.
Yeah,
I think that's the huge part of it is that it's actually so big and it's really diverse. And
staggering,
to say that America is like one thing is just is wrong.
Absolutely, it's like a whole bunch of different countries almost cohabitating, I guess is the word. So we're coming up on 40, so we won't take up too much more time on this one. But one thing, I've just been looking at the Sharptooth Bear icon as we've been talking, and I noticed that you've actually done. You've sort of done this with your Perfect Storm promotional artwork, in that your little cartoon characters, versions of the performers, are in their own way almost like a little logo. Like they have the same kind of lines drawn on each, even though the body changes and you see them in different situations, you can still recognize what they are kind of immediately, and they are just built up of simple lines.
Yeah, absolutely, and there is even the kind of my ones, I guess. The nod to the Sharptooth particularly is that they have these kind of skeleton grill kind of teeth.
Yes, it's very distinctive.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the vibe that they all have.
So maybe with that, we can end the Radiohead discussion here, unless there's anything else you'd like to add about Radiohead that you've been just burning to say.
I don't think so. I just think that they are a great example of kind of cross-disciplinary stuff where where both forms are kind of equally important and don't. It's not like they went to a photo shoot for the cover of the album.
Yeah, it has purpose, doesn't it?
And then that was there. It's like no, this is we're doing an art thing here.
Yes, you're right.
I really like that,
because that's kind of your multi-medium disciplines with what you do. So that actually makes quite a lot of sense. The whole time I was looking at the artwork for Radiohead, I just thought, yeah, this is Dan. This is Dan all over.
Yeah. It's like, I see where it comes from now.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah. So thank you for talking to me about Radiohead this week. For the listeners, we're going to record it now, but check back in next Monday for our discussion on Dan's creation, Perfect Storm.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Great interview with Dan there. I really enjoyed having the conversation with him. I learned quite a lot, and just about where Dan draws a lot of his inspiration from. I even say it in the interview that I was looking through a lot of Radiohead's album artwork, and just thinking to myself, yeah, this is Dan all over. And so with that, we have quite a nice base to work off of, which leads nicely into part 2 of the interview with Dan Bain, which is more about his Perfect Storm show. We talked about it a little bit in this interview, but I really wanted to hold off and get as much of the conversation as we could about the Radiohead album, and then move on to Perfect Storm next week. So if you enjoyed that, come back next Monday. The episodes drop at about 6 in the morning, because back when I was working in an office, there were certain podcasts I just needed to listen to on the way in to just help me get through the Monday, as we all know Mondays can be kind of tough. So I hope yours is going okay right now. If you want to follow Dan online, you can visit his Linktree at I am Dan Bain. He also runs 3 different Instagram accounts. He has Noosed Octopus, which is his main Instagram account. He has Stand Up in Hell, which is another project of his involving AI artwork and demons. Well, AI artwork generated demons performing stand-up comedy. So if that kind of thing is your jam, definitely check that out. And then if you want to get a little preview for next week's interview, go to Instagram and search Perfect Show, and you can see the interesting design of the feed that Dan has, which is the focus of the last sort of 10 minutes of the show next week. Dan does a couple of podcasts. The first one is Sleepy Time Mumbles, which is a good one to listen to when you go to bed. I've listened to a few episodes of that. That is at sleepytime.buzzsprout.com. All the links for these, by the way, will be in the show notes. He's also got a new podcast called X-Men the Animated Series Re-Examined, which he does with Kiwi expat living over in the UK, Javier Harquin, I think you pronounce his last name. I really apologise if I said that wrong, Javier. You can, of course, follow Dan on Facebook at I am Dan Bain. You can also sign up to his mailing list there. I'm on the mailing list. I quite enjoy receiving it each month. And then finally, Dan has a book which you can buy called These Are Not the Rules of Improvisation. You buy it through a Ko-fi website, so I've got the link down in the show notes. As for me, as always, I am Taylor Ruddle. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as Taylor Ruddle Comedy. Blessed to get the same handle on all of those sites. I'm not on Twitter. I was on Twitter, but didn't enjoy it. If you want to catch me doing stand-up comedy live, you can come out on the last Thursday of the month at Sprig and Fern Merivale in Christchurch for a show called Pizzas, Pints and Punchlines. I believe that is $45, and that gets you entry to the show, a pint, and a pizza. Super reasonable in this economy. And of course, you get access to a hilarious comedy show, usually featuring me. And then on usually the third Saturday of the month at Union Fair in Prebbleton, we have a similar format of a show. It's dinner and a show. And again, it's about, I believe it's $45 or $55, but that includes dinner and dessert, as well as entry to the comedy show. So in this economy, that is a hell of a steal. If you're interested in either of those, go to facebook.com/CanDoComedy for more info and to book your seats. And one more thing, just while I remember, please leave a rate and review on Apple Podcasts if you'd like to help me out. A couple of weeks ago when I recorded this, I checked the rankings and I was ranked number 55 in New Zealand in the comedy interviews category, which, if I'm honest, is probably more of a reflection on the fact that there are not many comedy interview podcasts on the New Zealand Apple Store. But either way, if you wanted to help me out and get me as close to the top as you can, I think the top two are Tom Sainsbury's Small Town Scandal, I believe was the name of it, and then the ZM Cruise funny podcast. I don't know, my brother listens to it. But either way, if you want to help me knock off either of those two, leave a rate and a review on Apple Podcasts, and we will get this podcast to the moon.
One last thing before you go. On the 10th of May 2023, my first ever mini comedy special goes live on YouTube for free. We filmed it almost a year prior, and I'm so proud of the final result. The name of the special is Taylor Ruddle, All My COVID Jokes, and like I said, you can watch it for free on YouTube. If you search Taylor Ruddle Comedy into YouTube, you can find it, or you can just visit www.taylorruddle.com/spesh. That's SPESH. And you will be redirected to the YouTube video. I'm so happy with the final product, especially given that I only did the set, for the first time on the night. And I'd love for you to check it out, and let's see if we can get it to 500 views before the end of the year.